Hi folks, you're with Tastus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about how peasant workers from the third world are being fed into the first world to work in industries and sectors of the economy that are, in any commercial and organic sense, non-viable. Businesses that could not survive without a steady stream of exploitable, almost slave labor, you could call it modern day slave labor. What got me thinking about this, or thinking about it just now, was the government has made a bit of a splash about setting up a new department, and I noticed it in the budget numbers, a new department, and some NGOs are working along with it to stop or prevent or mitigate the effects, if you like, of what they call modern day slavery, bringing out workers that either aren't paid or are paid such a low wage that it's in effect tantamount to slavery. Now, I don't doubt this goes on. The scale of it's a little bit hard to measure, but I'm assuming it's widespread. So just to illustrate this, if there's lots of little shops, little food shops, takeout food shops, little corner stores, smaller out of the way restaurants, those sorts of things. Those sort of places, they're not viable. They're not commercially viable. So the only way they can be made viable is by injecting slave labor. Now, it's meant to be illegal and it's meant to be wrong and bad, and but no one seems to really want to stop it. They talk about it and do a bit of a show, and maybe a couple of people a year will be dragged out in front of the TV cameras and given 6 months in the slammer. But in reality, nobody really wants to stop it, because it's the jobs where a lot of these third world illiterate IQ 80 peasants go into. And so it's condoned, and Western governments all over the West just look the other way for this sort of thing. Now, it has a number of knock-on effects, and I'll talk about those sort of now. And I'll use an example, say, and this is a recent example that ended tragically in this case, but there's a guy, he owns an ice cream shop and they sell some other desserts and he gets his sales around $7,500 a week sales. It's not a huge shop, and he's got costs of about $5,000 or so a week. So he's making between $2,500 a week average. A little bit more in the summer, or but a little bit less in the winter, that sort of thing. But given it's primarily ice cream and frozen desserts and cakes and so on, so he's making $2,000 to $2,500 a week on average. Now, that's not a whole lot more than the average wage. Now, to make that, he's pushing 80 hours a week in the shop. So he's got almost no personal life or social life. His every waking hour pretty much is spent in the shop. Now, on top of that, he needs, particularly in the summer, not so much in the winter, but generally he needs help of about 65 hours plus a week, give or take, in the shop of casual labor. So he needs workers to come in to back him up over 65 hours a week. This is particularly the case in, say, lunch times, or particularly the case in summer during lunch times, or even in the evening, particularly on the weekends, that sort of stuff. So he needs that. Now, summer maybe a bit more hours, but now if he's only making on average $2,500 a week, and he's got even at the minimum wage, the absolute minimum wage, it's going to cost him about $1,000 to pay for the casual labor to cover those other busier periods. He can't not have the labor, because then he's going to miss out on sales. People won't wait in the shop and they'll walk out and go somewhere else, that sort of thing. So he's got to have that extra help, those extra hours of labor. Now, it's not a complicated job, and a fairly simple sort of person could be taught to do it. They need maybe a little bit of English, but otherwise he can get to do other things. So they can unload the supplies when they come around, and do all sorts of other things that free him up to give the customer service. So if he pays these workers, he's really down to not a whole lot more than an average wage. So Now he's got to work 80 hours a week. So his wage in per hour, his per hour wage is probably 40% below the average wage, given the hours he has to work at the shop. So the only way he's really going to get anywhere is if he doesn't have to pay for the labor, but he needs it. So what he does is, this guy is, he gets in these illiterate peasants and he says, well, you're like an intern or a trainee, so I'm not going to pay you. I want to know that you're going to be a good worker before I pay you. So you can work here for 2 weeks, and if I'm happy, I'll keep you on and pay you. If not, you'll have to go. So at the end of 2 weeks, he just says to the worker, unless they're truly exceptional, but he just says to the worker, look, I'm still not happy, but look, I'll give you another go. I'll give you another 2 weeks. Remember, he's not paying them. I'll give you another 2 weeks, and if you impress me. So at the end of the month, the worker says, well, I'm not going to work anymore unless you pay me. Oh, well, I'm not really sad. And then he just gets the next sucker. Now, there's an endless stream of suckers that he's able to bring in and use that way. So it's illegal. He should be, but the people that he employs, these illiterate third world peasants, he tells them things like, well, if I report you to the authorities, I'll say that you did this or said that or whatever, and they'll deport you back to your country where you came from. So, don't you give me any shit, or I'll make your life hell. And these people are in a new country, they don't understand the rules, or and it scares them, and so they just walk away and let it go. Then he gets the next sucker, and so on. So he can get away without paying people, and which is what he was doing for quite a while. I'm surprised he got away with it for as long as he did. But anyway, sooner or later, he's going to come across someone who isn't going to take that. So he managed to string a guy out for a couple of months, or maybe 6 weeks, I think it was. And the guy demanded to be paid. And this shop owner told him to, get lost, and made threats. And so the guy pulls out a knife. They struggle, and the shop owner ends up getting injuries, and he dies shortly afterwards. Now, this is very unfortunate. I'm not recommending anybody do that, by the way. But this is sort of where these things can end up. Now, the bottom line was, given the shop rent that the guy has to pay, the cost of the ice cream, the competitive price he had to sell it at, because there's another ice cream shop, 250 yards down the road, and that sort of thing. So he can't just jack the price up and hope to improve his profits that way. Now, maybe there are things he could have done. I don't know. It was quite a small shop. He had a probably pretty decent range of ice cream in there. I don't think he could have done much more. Maybe ice cream wasn't a business, and he should have turned it into a massage parlor or something. But anyway, he couldn't make money at that business if he was paying people. Now, there's a lot, but there's a lot of businesses in the West, a lot, that are in approximately similar circumstances, and the only way they can make money, that's even remotely is going to reward them for hours of work they're putting in, is by not paying the workers they have, or getting as many hours of work as they can. Now, there's another example, is a cafe, in like a coffee shop cafe in a reasonably busy shopping center, but there's a lot of competition. Every floor and every area has got a coffee shop, and they do like coffees and some pretty basic lunches and muffins, that sort of stuff, donuts and whatnot. And they do all right, but again, it's the same thing. They rely heavily on not cheap but free labor. So they do the same. Now, the guy who owns it is Chinese, and he exploits Chinese workers. So he gets the Chinese workers in, and he said, "Look, I'll give you lunch, or a meal and a coffee. I'll give you that, but you have to impress me that you're going to be a good employee before I'll pay you. How do I know you're not going to scare the customers away? Why should I pay you for that? Now, I speak Mandarin well enough to at least understand where he's going. He talks too quickly for me to pick every word, but I've got, I know the gist of the conversation. You can tell from the look on the face, that sort of thing. So you know what's going on, or I do, and that's what he's doing. He's exploiting these workers. Now they do other scams as well. They say, all right, well, if you work for me for free, what I'll do is I know people inside the immigration department, and they can make sure that your aunt, uncle, cousins, and third cousins, and your entire fucking village and everything can come over to a first world country and have all the free stuff put on by all these white people. And they go goggle-eyed at that, because that's the dream. That's the wet dream that they all come to the West with, that they can get the entire population of their fucking village to be over here and getting all the goodies, and they'll be the big man who made it all happen. So say that I can, but you have to work for me for free. You have to work for me for free for 6 months or a year, and then I'll start. I have to know that you're going. And so these people, again, that are fairly simple rural peasants to begin with, they go, oh, okay, all right. Now don't tell anyone, because I'm doing a special deal just for you. So let's a secret between us, and they get away with this sort of stuff. So they can run their whole cafe with free labor. And but the guy, he's unapologetic, because I said to him, I said, it's a bit low, isn't it? Screwing the. He said, well, why? They're just stupid peasants. They'd be worse off, where they came from. At least I'm giving them something. Why should I lower my standard of living for the benefit of some low IQ feral peasant from out in the sticks? And this is the Chinese guy talking here about his fellow countrymen. And I said, wow, that's and he points out that if he had to pay everybody for the wage that they're due, by law, then he couldn't run his business. When I say couldn't run his business, he was doing better than the ice cream shop guy, but really the cost of labor would reduce his standard of living. Now he's, I want to live in a nice house. I want to send my kids to good schools. I want to drive a Merc. If I have to pay my staff the legal wage, I can't do that. I can't live that lifestyle. Now he works hard. He works long hours himself and all that sort of thing. But again, his business wouldn't be viable if he had to pay the labor. Now, when they bring all this cheap labor in, there's all those scams go on, which in my view is tantamount to slavery, if not slavery outright. But the idea, the cost, all these businesses, you've got thousands upon thousands of businesses all over the West, and certainly in Australia. These businesses are not viable. They could not survive, or not in the shape they're in. They could not survive if they had to pay the legal wage. They just couldn't do it, or they would be giving the most diabolically bad service. Only 20 people will be able to get lunch a day, or something. Something would have to give. So this is there's an entire sector in Australia that employs hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of people, and that sector is not most of it is not viable, not commercially viable. If they have to pay the proper wages, they cannot exist. Now, on the other side of it, these peasants that come from the third world, they don't live like the existing people in the first world. They can live 15 or 20 to a 2-bedroom apartment. They can live 10 or 11 to a 1-bedroom apartment. It's bunk beds and mattresses on the floor, 17 people sharing one toilet and all that sort of thing. And they can rotate on shifts, and they maybe all share one car. So they live communally, which is how they lived, by the way, in with the third world shithole they came from. So that they live communally, and that's the only way they can afford to work at these low wage jobs. But that's not how people live in the West. But I think it is effectively the globalists are forcing that sort of lifestyle on all of us. And I think all of us will be living that way in another 20, 30 years. And it'll all have been forced upon us. And this idea of the wealth and the personal wealth and the private wealth that was quite normal, 10, 15, 20 years ago in the West, and widespread, across the middle class. That'll all be gone. Now, on the basis of on the other side, if you like, on the backhand of this, these people coming and working the low wages, it has the effect of dragging down the wages at the bottom quite severely. So you're seeing this wide sort of detachment from the wages. So if you look at something like 62, 63% of the entire workforce makes less than the average wage. So you can see how the average has moved in terms of the numbers. The average is applying to fewer and fewer people every year. So that's the wage mathematics, if you like, of how it's moved. Now, the average wage used to be in the middle, give or take, but now it's not. It's sometimes if you just extrapolate out, if you will, the mathematics over the next 10 years from what it was 10 years ago, then something like 75% of workers will be making the average wage or less. So 2 workers making the average wage can get by on a fairly modest lifestyle in Australia now. But in another 5 years, it'll be 3 incomes will be required. 5 years after that, 4 incomes, 5 incomes, and so on. So what we're looking at here is that the entire population will need to live communally, I believe, certainly over the next 1 or 2 decades. So the benefit of bringing in all these cheap, low IQ, illiterate third world peasants, it delivers no benefit ultimately to the economy, because it's creating inefficiency, is creating an artificial economy that cannot survive in a real world. And it's lowering wages, not just at the bottom, but also now in the middle. But cost of living isn't declining. So as purchasing power declines, cost of living on a relative and absolute basis increases. House prices keep on, rents keep on going up, even while purchasing power is declining. So you're seeing, it's not unusual now to see groups of migrants, at least groups of 10 plus migrants, from the subcontinent and so on, wandering around in groups, looking for places to rent. And I think that's, as I mentioned a moment ago, how it's going to be. But the migrants being brought in are creating numerous problems, and I think the globalists and our governments know it. They're creating an ever greater artificial economy that can only survive on slave labour, and they're reducing the standard of living and the purchasing power of the Western paycheck generally. Also, you're looking on the other side where the migrants can't compete. They can't speak English. They've got no skills. They come from some third world peasant shithole. They can't compete for jobs unless the slave labour thing is permitted, or condoned, or the government looks the other way, or the various authorities look the other way. A lot of NGOs claim to be, well, we're against slavery and we're going to stop it, and they make a lot of noise, they huff and they puff, but they do fuck all. They don't do anything, and it's allowed to continue. And I think it's the globalist shtick to have that, not only have it but increase it. So when you look at the quotas and the race quotas and the gender quotas, these are all being allowed so that white people, the local white people, the local population, are forced out of the competition stakes, because an illiterate peasant just can't compete with a white worker if you have to pay them the same wage. Why the fuck would you pick a peasant that can't speak the language as against someone who speaks the language and understands it? You plain wouldn't do it if you had to pay them the same wage. If you can get away with paying the peasant nothing, well, sure, do that, which is what's happening. The other side is immigrants can't compete with the locals when it comes to even better paid jobs. So the only way they can overcome that is by forcing race and gender quotas, or race quotas in particular. So you see absurd things like an executive director of procurement and purchasing for quite a large firm, actually. The the job was given to an Indian migrant woman who just got off the boat. Now, who's only ever worked in some rural bullshit town in India and for the family business. So completely unqualified, embarrassingly unqualified, but all white people were passed over to give her the job as part of this quota. So it's also reducing the pool of talent that exists in business as well by having these sort of things, because the best qualified person isn't getting the job. Anyway, those are my thoughts. You've been a Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and I look forward to seeing your comments below, because this is quite a controversial subject, I think.